So it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here to Stony Brook University. I'm Charlie Robbins. I'm the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, Dean of our undergraduate colleges. I'm a faculty member in the School of Social Welfare and our graduate program in Public Health. And it really is my honor to welcome you all here and to welcome you to what is actually both the kickoff for this incredible conference, but also a part of our Provost lecture series. And I think it's really important that tonight's lecture be a part of the Provost lecture series. I work really hard to ensure that we use this series to bring some of the best minds, some of the best thinkers, but also some of the really critical topics of the day to Stony Brook, so that the Stony Brook community, both on campus and off campus, get a chance to engage with these issues. And I believe that tonight's lecture is one of those. Just to give you an idea, in the last year, we've had Cornell Weston, Tavis Smiley, we've had Marian Wright Edelman, Ben Cohen. So we've tried to move a little bit away from the tradition of just having basically engineering and physics lectures and to include some of the other issues that are really critical. The Center for the Study of Working Class Life is dedicated to exploring the role of class in today's world and really looking at all of the issues that impact the world through the lens of class. And I think it really clarifies a lot of social justice issues. I think it clarifies a lot of social questions in a way that otherwise would not be. The center has been in existence since November of 1999. It's something that we at Stony Brook are very proud of, and we know is widely embraced by people in the field throughout the country. The conference is something that everyone looks forward to. It happens every 2 years. We think it's an amazing opportunity. But I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of the fact that the work of the center goes on throughout the year. And it's really important to know that it's not just limited to tonight's program, which is really, I think tonight's program, the next few days, when you read the agenda, when you look at the schedule and who's speaking and what they're speaking about is really amazing. It's a great opportunity. It really is my pleasure now to introduce the person who makes all of this possible. Michael Zweig is a prolific author and frequent speaker at national and international conferences and forums. He's a professor in our Department of Economics and director of the center. He's a recipient of the State University Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching, as well as our President's Award for Excellence in Teaching. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Michael Zweig, who will then talk a little bit about the conference and introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Charlie. Welcome to everybody. It's great to see you all here. And I just want to say that the conference this year is the biggest that it's ever been. We have over 50 sessions, more than 200 presenters, and many other people who are coming just to participate in here and join in the conversation. So it's really quite gratifying, and I have to thank everybody who's here because you are the conference, and not me. All I do is try to work it so that you all can get together and make something happen. We have also quite an international crowd. We have people at this conference this year from 18 countries outside the U.S. and Canada. And it's really a testament, I think, to the fact that in an era of globalization, in an era of neoliberal policy throughout the world, as capitalism is triumphant, working class studies spreads in common territory all over the planet. So we have people here from Nepal, we have people from Singapore, from Australia, from Poland, from Eastern Europe, from Turkey, from Norway. It's very cool, and it's also very good to have the kind of exchange and the kind of interchange across borders so that we understand that there's really one economy. There is not a domestic U.S. economy and then globalization is out there. We are integrated into one global capitalist system, and we need to analyze it and understand it as such. So I want to just run through a few logistics about the conference, because this is the opening plenary session of the How Class Works 2014 conference. It is the 7th in the series that we've done here at Stony Brook, and I should say that in 2004, 10 years ago when we had the How Class Works conference, that was the founding of the Working Class Studies Association, which we did here at this place. So that's good that we have grown, and you will find in your registration packet a membership form for the Working Class Studies Association, and we encourage everybody to join. The structure of the program is that tomorrow morning and Saturday morning there are plenary sessions starting at 9 o'clock from 9 until 10:30, and then there's a series of 3 time periods where there are simultaneous sessions going on. Those sessions are all on the 3rd floor of SAC. They are all within reach of each other, and I'm happy to say that up there, in the midst of it all, there's a bookstore that has the publications of the presenters here and other interesting titles. And the Center for Study of Working Class Life also has a store up there that has beautiful posters from Ralph Fasanella and from Milton Rogovin, and other DVDs and books and other things that are there that we encourage you to stop by, take a look, and as the regular bookstore, 20% off, free shipping anywhere in the United States, and discounted shipping for people overseas. So we really hope that you'll take away some food for thought and some beautiful art, because we can't have working class studies without arts. As an economist, you know, sometimes we are thought of as the dismal folk, but there's really more to life than just numbers, and those numbers, of course, reflect human existence and human experience, and that experience has to be manifest in so many different ways, including the arts. So we're very happy to have sessions here on the arts and also art available to take away for a modest sum. The bookstore is upstairs in room 309. The center store is there in room 312. There's flyers in the packet here on both of them. Now, there's a couple of things. I know that some people have had support from the Working Class Studies Association for travel. And if you need to pick up that money, which I suppose would be probably a positive thing, you need to see either Sarah Atfield or Cherry Rankin. So are they here? Is any? They're on their way. Well, so Barb Jensen, stand up. Talk to this woman, and she will get you into the proper environs so that you can get your money. Do not come to me, because the Center for Study of Working Class Life had nothing to do with the travel grants. We help people out by comping them into the conference and putting them up in the dorms, but the travel money comes from the Working Class Studies Association. In the back of your, oh, and then one other last thing. One of our conference participants, Lorenzo Costaguta, is in Brooklyn. He's here tonight, but he's looking for a ride, because if you take the train out from New York City, you can't get here in time for the morning plenaries. So he's looking for a ride. If anybody is commuting by car from Brooklyn tomorrow morning, who's here today, or Saturday morning, where is Lorenzo? Talk to that fine gentleman right there and make arrangements to bring him out in time to fully participate in the conference, which he really wants to do. But he's in Brooklyn, so what can you do? Now, in the back of the program, there's conference evaluation form. It's very important that you fill out that form before you leave, and leave it at the registration table, even if you're here only for one day. Fill out that conference evaluation form and leave it for us, or there's an address if you forget and you take the packet home. See that. Please send it in, because we do pay attention. And for those of you who've been here before, let me be clear that the breakfast tomorrow is not a stack of pastries. It is yogurt and fresh fruit. So you win And as a result of these conference evaluation forums, we've understood that we have to do better at how we take care of the people who come here, and so it works. So please do fill out those conference evaluation forms and send them in. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, the plenary begins. It's in the ballroom A, which is right next to us. There is a breakfast that we provide from 8 till 9 in the morning, and it's also in there in SAC A. And then tomorrow night, there's the banquet for those of you who are here for the conference. The banquet is tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, and I think we're going to have a good time at that. And make sure if you're a presenter or if you're chairing a session that the video releases get signed and brought down to the registration table, because we're doing something this time that we have never done before. We are videoing every single session, and we hope by the end of the summer to have the conference program up, which it is right now, on the conference website. But instead of just seeing the schedule, for every title of a session, it'll be a link to the video. So you just click, and there's the video. That's what we're aiming to do here, and so we need to get those video releases from the presenters and from the session chairs. Now, just let me finish off to thank you all for coming, to thank you for being here and making working class studies the community that it is and it is growing into. We've organized the schedule so that there's plenty of time for people just to hang out. It's not an energy-packed, every minute there's another program to go to. There's time to hang out, there's time to talk to one another, there's time to make the community that we are, and please do take advantage of that. On the other hand, there are sessions, and the sessions start punctually. They start on time, and they end on time. And we want to have those have an audience. So please don't be hanging out someplace when the sessions are going on. Find yourself a session and get involved and get engaged in the conversation, and then take advantage of the free time. But we are here together to learn from one another, to participate in this together as a community, and I think that that is what we hope it will turn out to be. Now, Charlie did mention that the university is, at Stony Brook is supportive of this center, and if you look at the program on the inside front cover, there's a list of all the different offices, including the Office of the Provost, and the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and the Undergraduate Office of Student Affairs, and all kinds of places in the Economics Department that have given material support for this conference. We could not do it without that material support, and I just want to thank openly in here, as well as in print in the program, what we are, that we're grateful to the university for its support. So now let's turn to the main event that we have going on here tonight. Saket Soni has a couple of different positions. He's the executive director of the New Orleans Worker Center for Racial Justice, and also for the National Guestworker Alliance. So these are organizations that grew up out of the experience of New Orleans in the Katrina era, where there was just catastrophic destruction, of course, physically, but also a tremendous shock to the social environment, and the bringing in of guest workers to work in New Orleans in the Reconstruction, and the development of real serious discussion and organization and agitation around racial justice for worker justice, and that intersection of race and class. And I think that there is no way to understand class dynamics without understanding their intersections with race, with gender, and with nationality. And that's not just an analytic question, although it is, but it's a very practical question on the ground. There isn't anybody that I know of in this country who has more direct experience with challenging those dynamics and trying to mold them and shape them into organized activity on the part of working people, on behalf of working people. I don't know anybody better than Saket Soni to come and talk to us about it. That's why we invited him, and we're very glad that he's here. And I want to present to you now Saket Soni.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Michael, for that really wonderful introduction. Thank you to the university for hosting this, this talk and this conference. And I'm glad from the lesson of the evaluations and that the conference has shifted to yogurt and fruit, it seems like democracy is working. So I would suggest this year, demand more. Raise the ante. That's right. My name is Saket Soni, and I represent groups of workers across the country who come from all over the world to the United States to work. We're all familiar with the phenomenon of workers getting up in poor neighborhoods to go to rich neighborhoods every morning. Some of us have been those workers. Many of our parents have been those workers. Many of us know those workers because they work in our homes, our neighborhoods, and our communities. There is a global phenomenon that mirrors that phenomenon, which is that every day, every week, every month, workers wake up in poor countries and make the journey from poor nations to rich nations. That's what globalization to some extent was all about. And if you add up all those workers, global migrant labor today makes up a country in exile bigger than the population of Germany. They're here in the United States. You no longer have to take that Solidarity Center trip to visit the global working class. Just go down the street to the temp agency, to the Home Depot, go to any city, big or small, in the United States, and you will see global labor. What I want to talk about today is, what does global labor have to do with notions of class in the United States? How is the journey from somewhere in the world to Stony Brook or Chicago or Hershey, Pennsylvania or New Orleans, Louisiana, how is that a journey into consciousness for the global migrant? What does that have to do with how race and class are constituted here in the United States? And most importantly, because we're here to change reality, not just to interpret it, most importantly, what does that have to do with our potential to build a social movement that can change the conditions of inequality in this country? So I'm going to start by talking about a group of workers in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and tell you a story. In August 2011, we were organizing an improbable group of workers in the Hershey chocolate factory. A month before Occupy Wall Street, these 250 workers walked off the assembly line of the chocolate factory, held hands, and sang an improbable song. Some of you may know it. It's called Bella Ciao. Does anyone know that song? Can you sing it for me? There you go. Can we clap along? So imagine this Hershey chocolate factory in the middle of Pennsylvania. The workers are walking off the assembly line, holding hands, and singing this song that can be traced back to about 1943, when it was sung by rice weeders on the River Po Basin. This song migrated, like the workers, all over the world, where it was sung not only in Italy, but other parts of Europe, then in parts of Asia, and in the 70s became Brezhnev's favorite song. It was recorded by a San Francisco punk band in early 2000. And in 2011, a month before Occupy, these workers singing this song held hands and sat and conducted a plant occupation. They occupied the Hershey factory a month before Occupy Wall Street. It was the first factory sit-in, the first plant occupation in that region since the Pittston strike from years before. And what was so incredible about these workers was not only what they did, but who they were. These were young guest workers from all over the world. They were from Turkey, China, Mongolia, Ukraine, other parts of the former Soviet Union. They were from Brazil and Chile. And they had descended from universities across the world to the Hershey factory. Back home in their universities, they were recruited to come and learn about work and life in the United States, to get a taste of U.S. society, and to work a little along the way. When they arrived in the Hershey chocolate factory, they were working on the bottom of the factory floor for $1 to $5 an hour. They were living in company housing. They were held captive, in essence, by their employer. And when they protested their conditions, they were threatened with retaliation and deportation. In essence, they were Hershey's captive workers. They were told at home in their universities by recruiters that they would learn about American culture, and they did learn about American culture, earning $1 to $5 an hour for sub-minimum wage work, and facing threats of deportation when they wanted improvements. So that day in August 2011, singing that song on the factory floor, they held the factory for hours. Then they ran out of the factory onto the streets where the labor movement of Pennsylvania was gathered, including some of the old Pittston strikers. And they were blocking traffic on behalf of the workers while the workers were chanting protests. Traffic was blocked. Labor leaders, including the Pennsylvania State Federation president, Rick Bloomingdale at the time, engaged in civil disobedience, found themselves in jail. The workers marched back to a union hall that belonged to the Bakers Union, the BCTGM union. That union, by the way, was founded in 1937 as a result of another sit-down strike. And there, sitting in that union hall, just like this, those workers sang songs from their home countries, dreamed a vision of taking the factory the next day. And in those next 3 days, they played out the entire labor movement from about 1919 to 1936. They conducted sit-down strikes, slowdowns, sit-ins. They conducted all sorts of advanced forms of labor monitoring. They went across Pennsylvania and had kitchen table tours to mobilize community members to Hershey, Pennsylvania. And I think over those 3 days, they got what they came for, a real cultural exchange. Not the one they had been promised, but an exchange across generations, an exchange between young global labor and the historical working class people of middle Pennsylvania, many of whom before that were against immigration to the country. They were against young people taking the jobs of the young people who were there. But over those 3 days, they built real relationships with those Hershey workers and backed them in their struggle. Now, these Hershey workers leapt from the factory floor to the front page of the New York Times. They were in the New York Times 14 times before they were done with their campaign. We learned that at some point, Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State at the time, was conducting morning meetings about these workers to figure out how this Cold War era State Department program that was supposed to foster dialogue between the US and other countries had turned into essentially a temp agency. And in the midst of all of that, something really extraordinary happened, which is that what these workers surfaced for people in Pennsylvania was not just the immigration story. That was, of course, what the New York Times reported. The story beneath the story was the way in which work itself had changed over the 10 or 15 years that this Hershey plant shifted from hiring local workers in Pennsylvania to bringing in guest workers. When these workers, the guest workers, demanded change from Hershey, Hershey said, well, I'm sorry, you're not our workers. We don't employ you. And they were right. Over the last 15 years, Hershey had changed its business model and entirely subcontracted and deeply outsourced its logistics division. So everybody who carried boxes, packed chocolates, they were packing Hershey's chocolates. They had Hershey labels. They were sold as Hershey labels. The Hershey Corporation made a profit during the 5 chocolate holidays of the year, which I learned a lot about during this campaign. The Hershey Corporation earned a profit upon the sales of this chocolate, but these workers weren't Hershey workers. Hershey had outsourced its entire logistics operation to a global German subcontractor whose U.S. subsidiary was called XL. This is the German DHL company, whose U.S. subsidiary runs Walmart warehouses and other warehouses. XL had temped out the work to a small down-the-street temp firm called SHS. SHS had temped out the recruitment to a California-based recruiting agency, which sent other recruiters from other countries to get the students. By the time the students came, not only were they not Hershey workers, they weren't workers at all. They were participants in a cultural exchange program. And they had no right to labor standards under US law, according to the employers. More importantly, the employers could distance themselves from any responsibility to these workers. So jobs that used to be union jobs that came with rights, respect, and a contract for Pennsylvania families, and gave families a pathway through manufacturing into a decent middle-class existence, those jobs were now temp jobs that trapped foreign guest workers at the bottom of a subcontracting scheme that was 5 layers deep. These Hershey workers lifted up the lid of the Hershey factory, and inside it, we saw the future of work in the United States. The shifts that this Hershey factory went through are emblematic of the shifts across the country that many workers have known for a long time, that many commentators are arriving at describing in a big way now. I would say that there are 3 major shifts that will impact workers in the next 40 years that are emblematized by these workers in the Hershey factory. First, just like the Hershey factory did, the country is shifting in major sectors of the economy to contingent work. Now, we don't have good language for this. People argue over the words contingent versus precarious. Now people have come up with the precariat, whatever you may call it. The era of permanent, long-term, predictable, regular employment has come to an end in major sectors of the economy. According to 2006 statistics, there are 46.2 million contingent workers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics calls contingent workers workers who are experiencing temporary, subcontracted, part-time, or otherwise unpredictable employment. Economists all over the country are contesting this 42.6 million number. Some say it's wrong, it's too small. Some say it's much bigger, depending on whether you talk to economists or the temporary industry lobby. Whatever you may say about the numbers, it is uncontestable that the scale of the phenomenon includes 1/3 of the US workforce. It has become a national problem without a name, and it deserves a name and a language, and it deserves more than that. It deserves what the Hershey workers were, which is real protagonists inside that experience that are coming out and campaigning. The second major shift is the flip side of this. Not only has the nature of employment changed, but the nature of unemployment has changed. People used to be, people used to think of unemployment as a short-term phenomenon. I would have a job, it would be certain, predictable, last a long time. There may be, during a bad economy, a short spell during which I'll be unemployed and the state will take care of me. Well, 40% of the unemployed now have been unemployed for 27 weeks or more, which is the definition of long-term unemployment. And the Federal Reserve has noted, as has the United Nations, that there is a veering towards dangerously structural unemployment, a state in which people are locked out, not just temporarily, but now permanently, as contacts, skills, and other things fall completely out of date. There are workers who are completely locked out of the labor market. Now, this has a racial dimension. African American workers are unemployed for 3 times the length of white workers who are unemployed. Latinos are unemployed for twice as long as the length of an average unemployed white worker. All of this has a gender dimension. All of this has a dimension of national origin. But I believe, even though there are differentiations, it is now a phenomenon widespread enough that it's worth it to ask, is it possible to create a cultural coalition, a class coalition, between the agricultural worker and the adjunct professor? Because both of them, in essence, are trapped in the same unpredictable employment relationship, where they're taking piece rate work, whether it's 1 strawberry at a time in the fields of Louisiana, or 1 math class at a time in some state college that can't afford to pay its teachers. Is it possible to unite those 2 populations and everyone in between into a new class experience? Well, I don't know the answer, but I would say it is very urgent to find the answer because of the 3rd major shift. Not only has the nature of work changed, not only has the nature of unemployment changed, but the nature of the labor market itself has changed. The pool of workers available to any employer is now much bigger. These Hershey workers are evidence of that. That little Hershey factory was not choosing between people in 2 towns in Pennsylvania. They were choosing from across 17 countries in the world, where they went to 6 and brought workers. So as the labor market changes, as the local labor market is linked to the global labor market, and as these other changes are happening, it's important to really reevaluate what can be done not only to rework class experiences in the United States, but to tilt all those experiences towards some kind of unified action that'll ride the wave of consciousness we have right now in this country, finally, about inequality, and get us to a result that, just like it's good to think past the yogurt and strawberries and get to scrambled eggs. We need to think past a 10-10 indexed minimum wage and get to a fair wage, a real job, a career ladder, the possibility of advancement, not a previous nostalgic promise of employment in the old economy that, by the way, didn't exist for people of color, women, and many other kinds of workers anyway. But a new promise of work in the new economy, given that it is an era of migrant workers, workers migrating from job to job across labor markets, workers across multiple employers. It's important to create a labor movement that matches the economy that we're in. These Hershey workers were about 19, 20, 21. I was about their age when I came to the United States. I made a very improbable journey from New Delhi to Chicago. I came as a foreign student on a scholarship. I grew up in Delhi in a very conscientized school where activist education was given to us from an early age. There was a slogan in New Delhi when we were marching against apartheid South Africa in Hindi, and in English translated it went, "Don't let the blood that flowed in Chicago dry in vain." It was a reference to Haymarket. As a result, I grew up until the age of 14 thinking that Chicago was a place in the Soviet Union. And when it was time to come to Chicago, I was so excited to finally visit Haymarket Square. After all, there must be an extraordinary monument to Haymarket. I bought a copy from a street vendor of a book called The Black Bolshevik by Harry Haywood. I packed a bag. I came to Chicago. I told the cab driver to take me to the University of Illinois, which happened to be the wrong school. And the next morning arrived in Chicago and ventured out to look for the Haymarket Memorial and found that there was none. And after that, I was a foreign student. I was undocumented for years. I became a guest worker myself, and then became an organizer and made the next improbable journey into my understanding of the United States when I went to New Orleans, Louisiana, 3 months after Hurricane Katrina. For the Hershey workers, the workers at Walmart stores, the workers who are temped out, whether it's in Silicon Valley or Springfield, Illinois, each of these workers shows us a little bit in their own experience what the workplace at the end of the road of this economy can look like. But if you haven't seen it, the place to go to see it was New Orleans, Louisiana, where thousands of African American workers were locked out of the Reconstruction of New Orleans, while at the same time, thousands of immigrant workers were brought in and locked in. And race was used very intentionally through public policy and through other means as a wedge between two groups of workers who were sitting together in what had become the largest construction site in the world and the largest labor camp in the world. During those days, we would go out to the biggest day labor corner in the South, where hundreds of African American, Latino, and Asian men gathered under a statue of Robert E. Lee that had been commissioned during the post-Civil War era. This was, during a time of cultural reclamation by the fallen Confederates. They commissioned these statues all over the place. These statues became the shelters for the biggest day labor corners in the country, where contractors were coming, taking workers at the lowest bid, driving out in buses to uncharted and dark neighborhoods that had not yet received electricity in the city. And we would rescue workers literally from confinement and captivity from these houses. We would rescue women workers from hotels where they were locked into the rooms they were cleaning. We would rescue workers from the back of trucks as they were arriving in military vehicles to work on Bourbon Street so that the casinos could reopen, so that consumers could come back. And all the while, people who lived in New Orleans, owned homes in New Orleans, some of the first African-American homeowners in the country were struggling to literally climb through barbed wire fences to reclaim their homes. I thought I had seen it all until I met another group of workers, this group of workers. These were workers who were sitting in Dubai and Mumbai, parts of the Middle East and India, when they read newspaper articles saying that there were jobs in the Gulf Coast. There was no one to do the work. They needed workers, they needed welders and pipe fitters to come and rebuild the shipyards. Now, there were, I can testify, no dearth of people willing to do work in Alabama, Mississippi, and the rest of the Gulf Coast after Katrina. The problem was there was never anyone to do the work at the wages and in the terrible conditions that employers wanted. Employers claimed there was a labor shortage. They went far and wide shopping for the cheapest worker. They got these workers who had, in their own lifetimes, turned Dubai, which had once been nothing more than a sand desert, into the oil capital of the world, the capital city of OPEC. These were the workers who were then brought to New Orleans, Texas, and Mississippi to rebuild the shipyards and the oil and gas sector in the South. These workers were told that they would be able to bring their families, they would be able to bring their loved ones, they would get green cards, they would get legal status, they would stay here forever. The only catch was they had to pay $20,000 apiece for the visa. Now, $20,000 in Indian purchasing power terms is the equivalent of what $200,000 or $300,000 would be for us. For some of these workers, depending on the region in India, more. These workers were selling their ancestral homes to come. They were trapped in labor camps, and they found out that there were never any green cards. They were here on temporary visas for 10 months, crowded 24 workers at a time in labor camps, and forced to work. They were, in essence, experiencing modern-day labor trafficking and forced labor in the brave new world of the post-Katrina economy. These workers, even in those conditions, built an organizing committee. They walked miles to a church where a Catholic church gave them the annex, not only to pray, but then to have meetings. Before long, that annex was filled not only by the Catholics among the workers, but the Hindus and Muslims and the Jains and everyone who came and said Hail Marys and then figured out that they needed to organize. And I met them one morning in early January 2007 in a room like this where I thought I was meeting 10 workers, and astonishingly, there were in front of me 250 workers who wanted an answer of what they could do. Over the course of the next few months, these workers built clandestine organizing committees in the labor camps. Those committees were found out. Private security guards came into the labor camps, picked our organizers out of bed, and attempted to deport them. Workers were so distraught by this at the fact that they would be deported back into debt in their home countries that one of the workers, the key organizer, actually ran into the bathroom and slit his wrists. The rest of the workers watching this were frozen and paralyzed and just could not move their strike. Well, what happens when 300 workers are standing somewhere and they're paralyzed and frozen and can't move their legs is that you call it a labor strike, and that's what we called it. The workers officially went on strike, won the release of the workers who were about to be deported. The doors of the labor camp opened that morning in March 2008. We rescued the workers in a van, took them home, and we won their legal status and turned them into organizers. Over the next 2 years, from 2008 to 2010, these workers conducted strikes. They escaped from the labor camps. They walked from New Orleans to Washington. They exposed how the company had used immigration to chill their organizing, to threaten illegal deportations. And eventually, they won not only legal status, but the endorsement of the new Obama administration and the New York Times. They built a cultural coalition around them. These workers, who were metal workers working in captivity, are now in the United States as free workers with legal status, winning through struggle what 11 million workers are trying to win through legislation. And in the next few years, they will all join unions, while their kids, whether they were born in India or the United States, will become the newest generation of Americans in the South and part of society and a labor movement. It's an extraordinary story, and believe me, it was extraordinary every day that it happened. But what does it make us do? The future of work is here, and it's here to contend with. We have to exercise our political imagination to come up with the solutions for the next 40 years that the world of work presents. And I believe there are a few things to do. Firstly, all of you are students of history. In the United States, we have a history of bargaining that is tied to a shop floor, but we now have workers dispersed across supply chains, across shop floors, across employers, where more and more workers are no longer working for their real boss. So we need to reinvent bargaining and update it to the 21st century so that we really are bargaining with the 1/10 of the 1%, because capital has concentrated upwards while power below has disaggregated. We need to bargain with the people who are really controlling the economy, not just the people who are signing checks in the economy. Secondly, benefits, as you all know, were tied to union contracts. Well, that was part of a deal. The deal was that unions would be strong, and therefore the state could afford to be weak. Well, the state kept up its part of the bargain and remained weak and attacked the unions and allowed corporations to attack the unions. So what that means is that we not only need to reinvent bargaining, we need to reimagine the social contract in this country. Reimagine what fundamental guarantees working class people can have in this country, can demand and expect. That's not going to happen all at once. Over the course of the next few years, we and others like us, worker centers across the country, are building campaigns that are designed in cities and states across the country to launch a revolution of rising expectations around the new economy, not the old economy. So workers in San Francisco are arguing for a scheduling Bill of Rights, a retail workers' Bill of Rights, where they're not only demanding better pay, but control over their time, control over their schedules. Workers in New Orleans are demanding career ladders, not just jobs in construction. Workers in places across the country are fighting for a domestic worker Bill of Rights. Day laborers across the country are fighting for living wages on the street corners. Together, what we're building is a national foment, a possibility that across cities, in multiple theaters of the country, we do these curtain raiser campaigns where we can imagine not only what the next set of problems looks like, but what the next set of solutions looks like. I believe we have a shot that we haven't had in this country to do what happened in Tunisia, where, according to the labor movement, the problem no longer was how to get the labor movement strong, how do we get people to join. At some point during the Tunisian revolution, so many people wanted to join that the labor movement sat back and said, oh my God, what can we do? We've got too many people coming to us. Well, we would love to have that problem here in the United States. How does everyone from the agricultural worker to the adjunct professor and everyone before and everyone after join a movement, not just for labor reform, but for working class power, to lift standards for everyone in this country? We need to demand more, expect more, but it's not just enough to demand and expect. We need to be in constant struggle in the neighborhoods and in the workplaces. So what can you do? I think that we have an extraordinary need right now, not only to do the work of building our movement, but to theorize our movement. We have a new set of challenges. This is the body politic in the United States, the global labor that has arrived and the local labor that is affected. All intertwined, we're all taking a look at ourselves, and we're all realizing we're not the way we used to be. The workforce has changed. The majority of workers are now women. There are 11 million undocumented immigrants. Workers of color are in more industries than ever before. Everywhere from Silicon Valley to the supermarket at the end of the road, the notion of working and the expectations of work, that it would be a source of income, it would be a source of security and safety, and it would be a source of contribution to my community. All of that has been thrown by the wayside by this new form of work that is confusing. We don't have a common narrative about it. We don't have a common number around it. We have multiple kinds of experiences that are so fragmented and need to be brought together. And how will that happen? That'll happen, of course, through the practice of organizing, but also through the practice of looking at it and theorizing and figuring out where we can take these kinds of experiments as they get to scale. This is the same kind of work, and you know this better than I do. Antonio Gramsci looked at the grievance committees in Italy and looked at the difference between the way those grievance committees work and the broader institutions of labor. The broader institutions were slow, but those grievance committees were nimble. They could take action. They were the real labor movement. And over time, they became the source of power and struggle in the metal sector in Turin. This is what the political scientist from South Africa, Rick Turner, did when he studied the potential for democracy in the manufacturing sector in South Africa. A very nascent movement, our counterpart at that time, where in the end of the 1970s, end of the 1980s, no one would have thought that those metal workers in South Africa would be the leading edge, not only of the labor movement, but of the anti-apartheid racial justice movement in South Africa. But this man had the prescience to study it, to accompany the movement, and create a relationship between his study and the movement that helped it grow. I believe that's what we need here. I really believe, I once heard or read Beverly Silver say that the worker's own source for potential really needs to be understood as a source of power. Power is not just where you can take collective action to interrupt the economy. Power is not just where you can take collective action to interrupt production. Power begins when workers themselves, these workers and many others, feel that they have the ability to change something. These workers, being held captive atop the commanding heights of the economy, had a notion that they could escape from a labor camp, walk to Washington, run a hunger strike, and 3 years later legalize themselves when all the laws of the land said they couldn't do it. Across the country, there are workers like that. I think we're at a moment just before the inflection point in our society. The next 2 years will matter for workers of color as a movement of the formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated builds. That is a labor movement. That is a worker movement. A movement against the deportations of 11 million people and their children will build. That's a worker movement. A movement of women for better pay and equal standards at work will build. And it'll culminate in a moment a few years from now when we will have an extraordinary wave. And the question for us is, will we be able to rise the crest of that wave into the next era in our economy, or will the economy just pass us by? We'll be trapped in a wage scale in the previous economy as the new economy takes over. That's the question for us. So, I am so thrilled that we're here together to really work together on this project. I think that the thinkers and the doers are the same people, invariably. So often, organizing needs interrogation and inquiry. And as each becomes stronger, we build the next few phases of the movement. So I invite you to join us, join our Future of Work initiative, join the worker movement in this country, and let's connect around the issue of low-wage contingent work and the work of workers of color, workers globally, and workers here who are really reworking class in this country and the notion of class. Those Hershey workers, they did not identify as working class people. They were English speakers, the first in their family to be English speakers. They had iPhones. They came to this country wanting to learn about a corporation because they identified with the corporation. But when they sang Ciao Bella in that factory and they marched to the baker's hall and they thought about all of the different things the labor movement has done from time to time, nobody told them, by the way, about the notion of a sit-down strike or a slowdown. They thought they had invented it. And along the way, they reinvented their own class identity and their own class consciousness. And it's time to let the rest of the country do that with us. Thank you so much.